Story 1. The Whistle in the Arizona Wilderness. This happened back in 2015 during a solo hike I took in Arizona. The trails started with a short desert stretch, then went up a medium-sized mountain, and ended with a canyon-like walkthrough at the summit. For me, these 8 to 10 hour solo hikes were my way of clearing my mind and escaping the stress of daily life. The trail didn't seem to be well known at all. There was no parking nearby, and the trailhead was genuinely hard to find, hidden behind a line of thick bushes with a path that was faint and faded. I didn't actively seek out low-traffic routes, but I didn't like constantly running into people either, so the secluded path suited me fine. As I continued, the trees began to look increasingly dry. Most of them seemed dead. Many had fallen over the trail or had large, thick branches littering the ground. The path had clearly not been maintained in years. Further down, the trail started to lead through dense, overgrown bushes. The path was distinct enough to know I was still on the right track, so I kept going. That's when I heard it, a very distinct whistle coming from up the mountain. It was faint, but I could hear the whistle hold a few melodic notes before it stopped. I'll admit it was creepy and made me quite uncomfortable, but I just figured someone else was on the trail. At the moment, that was the only logical thing. Another 20 minutes went by, and I heard the same melodic whistle again, but this time it was much closer and louder. I was a little more freaked out, but I wasn't about to abandon the hike just because of some guy whistling nearby. I went up about a quarter mile further, keeping my pocket knife ready just in case. A tree had fallen right across the path, its thorny branches making it difficult to climb over, so I had to walk around it. I turned to the right and took a couple of steps before noticing a small valley, likely where a river used to flow. Right in the middle was a small den built from large sticks. Judging by its complexity, I knew it had to be man-made. I started putting the whistling and the den together, realizing someone might actually be living out here. A sudden sense of dread washed over me, and I decided I needed to leave immediately. But just as I turned to go, that same whistle came from right behind me. My heart stopped out of sheer terror. I quickly spun around to face the area behind the den. To my absolute surprise, a goat was standing right behind the valley, exactly where I had heard the sound. It stood there, motionless, its eyes seeming to stare into me. I also couldn't help but notice how large it was compared to others I'd seen in the area. I was genuinely panicking in my head, unable to comprehend the situation. After a few seconds, I managed to control myself and started walking back slowly, still facing it. But as I took one step back, it opened its mouth slightly, unnaturally, and then let out the exact same whistle I had heard too many times already. My fear took complete hold of me, and I sprinted down the mountain, falling multiple times over trees and rocks. I heard the whistle one more time, a soft echo down the mountain, as I finally made it to the trail exit. I never told anyone about this encounter, thinking no one would believe me, and I just sound like a coward. But I only recently heard about skinwalkers, and as soon as I dug deeper into them, I realized that may be the only possible explanation for what I saw. Story 2. The Eerie Snipe Hunt in Wisconsin. Every single year, my family and some family friends would go camping in Wisconsin. And every year, my dad and his best friend, Billy, would take me, my sister, and all the other kids on what they called a snipe hunt. If you're familiar with snipe hunts, you know it's basically a prank. Snipes don't actually exist. It was just a way for my dad and his friend to come up with exciting new ways to rile up all the kids. They describe snipes to us as highly aggressive, bird-like creatures that usually hide in trees and only come out at night. We were kids, so we ate this stuff up. Every year, my sister and I would get super excited thinking we were finally going to see a snipe. This year was no different. It was the second day of our trip, and after everyone had settled in, my dad and Billy began their mission. They told all the kids that tonight they were going to try and catch a snipe, swearing they had heard one outside the RV last night. They said anyone who wanted to come could join. All the kids were now super excited and a little afraid, but my sister and I were ready. We were ecstatic and eager the entire day. Finally, the sun started to set, and my dad gathered us all. A few kids were holding sticks for protection or battle, and one even brought a wooden sword. My dad said Billy had run up ahead to scout out the area as we all started heading into the woods. About 10 minutes of walking went by, and we heard rustling in the trees. We all looked up, and Billy jumped out, covered in red, screaming that a snipe got him. All the kids started running and screaming. Being 8, I didn't know it was just a prank, so I started running too. I ran as fast as I could, sprinting through the woods until I found a tree with a big bush I could hide in. I remember trying my best not to cry or make any noise. A few minutes of hearing nothing went by, and I peeked out of the bushes. That's when I saw it. Something that somewhat resembled a dog, except its legs were abnormally long and skinny. Its head looked mangled and deformed, and I remember seeing only patches of hair scattered around its strange body. I had no clue what it was. I watched it walk by slowly. Even though I was a good distance away, I could hear a faint moaning sound. In all honesty, I was mesmerized by this thing. I didn't like looking at it, but I also couldn't look away. The more I stared, the more I felt this overwhelming, strange sense of dread. Years later, that's the only way I can describe it. I was so young, I probably didn't fully understand what those kinds of feelings were, but I remember being in a daze. All of a sudden, I heard my name being called and the crunching of twigs and leaves in the distance. The creature I was staring at stopped in its tracks and looked at me dead in the eyes. Our mutual gaze was broken by my father grabbing my arm and picking me up, scolding me for running so far and apologizing that it was all just a joke. I'm sure a ton of emotions were running through him, but all I was concerned about was the creature. I turned to look if it was still there, but it was gone. I didn't even hear it run away. As my dad and I walked back to camp, I told him what I saw and how I thought it might have been a snipe. Of course, he said it couldn't have been, and that was the year I learned that snipes weren't real. Looking back, I'm not sure what I saw that night. For years, I told myself it was just a really big coyote, but something in me knew it wasn't. It wasn't until I learned about skinwalkers that my gut told me that's what it was. To this day, I have no definitive explanation. It could have been anything. I was very young. But even now, sometimes when I'm on bike rides or hikes in the woods, out of the corner of my eye, I can see it again, watching me. Story 3. The Uninvited Guest in the Canadian Cabin. I lived in a cabin out in Canada with my wife and 2 kids for almost 10 years. It was the life we all enjoyed, living out in the peaceful and quiet forest. Our cabin's location was very isolated, with no roads even leading to it. However, several other families lived in cabins a few miles around us. Over time, thin, faint paths formed between our cabins as we often traded goods and joined each other for dinner. We had a small vegetable garden, as well as a variety of livestock. Overall, our lives were good and quiet for years, but things took a very sudden turn. I was up late one night, sitting in our living room reading as I usually did, when I heard the cattle start moving around frantically outside. This was really unusual this late at night, so I went over to the window facing our backyard and moved the curtains aside. The cattle were on the far left side of the field, moving quickly as if they were running away from something. I shifted my gaze over to the right side. I couldn't see much through the darkness, but after my eyes adjusted, I was able to make out a very large deer standing partially behind a tree facing the house. It was very still, not moving at all, just looking in my direction. I couldn't tell if it was looking directly at me, but it gave me a very uneasy feeling. I didn't understand why the cattle would run from a deer, but seeing as it wasn't dangerous, I closed the curtain and went back to reading. A few more weeks went by as usual before my wife woke me up in the middle of the night. "What's going on?" She told me to be quiet and listen. I could see the fear in her eyes, as if she'd been up for a while. Very quietly, I could hear something moving around the cabin slowly. It sounded as if someone was dragging a stick along the walls all the way around. But after the sound made a full circle around the cabin, it stopped. I immediately got up, checked on my kids, grabbed my hunting rifle, and went to every window. I didn't see anything until the last window I checked, which was my bedroom window. There I could see the same deer standing in the dark forest, staring in my direction, completely motionless. Again, I'd never seen an animal act like this before, and I had no explanation for the sounds around the cabin. A dark feeling settled over me, and I closed the curtain. I didn't know what was going on, but it was starting to make me paranoid. I didn't believe in anything paranormal, but this was hard to wrap my head around. The next morning, I decided to take a long walk to one of my neighbors' cabins to ask if they had experienced anything unusual lately. I told my wife to keep the kids inside and make sure everything was locked, then headed down the path. The entire first mile, I was just trying to come up with any possible explanation for the events that had been happening. But the more I thought about it, the more scared I got. Halfway to my neighbor's cabin, I got a weird feeling, and almost instantly I heard leaves rustling behind me. I turned around and met the eyes of the deer standing right on the path, just 15 to 20 feet from me. Chills ran down my entire body as I noticed white around its irises and small pupils, a distinct feature like human eyes. I turned back around and ran all the way to my neighbor's cabin, practically in tears as I had just witnessed something I believed couldn't possibly be true. Thankfully, my neighbor was home and settled me down when I arrived. He seemed worried for me, but in a different way than I was expecting. When I told him what I had seen, he didn't even seem surprised. Sitting in his cabin, he began to share with me his beliefs about the Navajo Skinwalkers. He said they only show themselves if they want something from you or if you have disturbed them. Talking about it seemed to put him at peace, which only terrified me even more. I left soon after, and luckily nothing happened on the way back. During the next few weeks, I could barely sleep and had horrible paranoia, but after a while of nothing else happening, I began to get better. However, the peaceful life I once lived out in the cabin was taken from me, and I never fully recovered from the fear of what I saw. Eventually, we moved closer to town to give our children a better life. It's been almost 15 years since the events took place, and I never told my wife or kids what I saw on the path or even what the neighbor told me. I'm not entirely sure why, but something inside me just urges me to keep them out of it. I think that's why I felt the need to write this and share it now, because I've held it in for too long.